Oliver, we're talking about the speech George Osborne, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, made today about banks. And I guess the particular bit we're interested in on Lex is the quite explicit threat that if they abuse, water down, tunnel under, tunnel above, etc., the ring fencing, that he will force banks to split their retail and their investment banking bits. What was the reaction to that, first of all?
Well, the reaction in the market was fairly nonplussed, I have to say. The shares in the two main banks that would be affected by this, RBS and Barclays, were down slightly, but by no more than the market. So certainly the market took the whole thing in its stride. I think that's partly because, despite the great language George Osborne used, he's electrifying the ring fence, which no doubt plays very well on the TV screens on the 10 o'clock news tonight. But perhaps there's some sense that wondering whether he would actually go that far and push the button, because it would be a very radical measure and one with very unforeseeable consequences.
And of course there's the political audiences playing too, and we knew the ring fence was coming, but I guess it's interesting, isn't it, that shares didn't react at all, considering that as you and I were talking about before, this does seem like a step up in rhetoric, a step up in aggression, and the UK is kind of ahead of the pack now in terms of its attitude against the banks.
Yeah, certainly it seems that way. What's very interesting is that what George Osborne is proposing today is slightly stricter on the banks than had originally been proposed in the legislation when it came out last year. And that's the opposite to what's happening in Europe, where the equivalent legislation, the Liikanen review, which is similar but not quite identical, that's the talk now is that will be watered down, that won't be quite so harshly enforced. So the UK going in a very different direction to the rest of Europe, and of course to the US, where the regulation is not nearly so harsh.
So one thing's being more aggressive, the other thing is it a credible threat, do you think?
Well, it's hard to say, particularly when one of the main banks affected is RBS, which is 82% owned by the government. George Osborne would say yes, it is, and if banks abuse this ring fence, if they try to classify things as retail banking when in fact they should be investment banking, he'd have no hesitation in forcing a separation. The problem with doing that, though, is that it's very difficult to foresee what the consequences will be. If you separate the two, the investment banking side might have great difficulties, potentially could even fail, but it's difficult to predict that, and if it did fail, that would have a knock-on consequence to the rest of the City of London.
And of course there are still grey areas around Basel III, there's still grey areas about lots of other regulation coming out of the US and how it applies to banks here in the UK. So no share price move yet, but I'm sure as this gets debated in Parliament, share prices will move yet. Thanks very much, Oliver.